Hello, free people of Earth, and welcome to This Week in Tyranny, the most hardcore news show on Earth. A weekly program about authoritarianism, government overreach, and global injustice. Live from Chicago, Illinois. If tyranny is not at your doorstep, that's because there is someone in the street keeping it at bay.
We murdered my man like it was okay. For the life he ended, he got suspended with no pay. But if a man would've took the cop life, he would've got life and never again see the street lights, and that's right.
Welcome. My name is Conrad Rogas of truthandlaw.com. Today is Friday, June 2nd, 2023, and this is episode 26 of This Week in Tyranny. It's exactly 6 months that this show has been running, and it just so happens that this will be a jumbo episode. This probably will be a pretty long one, so we'll get right into it. But I just want to say up front, if you hear any noise, I've got the air conditioning running right now. There's basically a carnival outside of my house. The full moon is out, it's the weekend, so if you do hear anything, I apologize for the interruption, but I'll have to sacrifice that instead of getting here all hot, which I may get hot anyway because this is a hot topic. This episode will be about the migrant crisis and about Venezuela, and specifically it's about the migrant crisis in Chicago and where I live, in the neighborhood where I live. So the reason I talk about a topic like this, because here we do current events analysis based on first principles, right? So this is very important to talk about this. And actually in the area right where I live, by Wilbur Wright College, about 400 migrants have been moved in, and they're staying at basically the campus that is a community college in this area. It's on the northwest side in Chicago. This is where I live. And most of these migrants are from Venezuela, right? So I'm going to talk about that whole topic. I'm going to talk about the migrant crisis. I know that's a controversial issue. I'm going to talk about Venezuela specifically. I'm going to talk about it a lot. And I'll put timestamps on this video, so if you're here to just get my thoughts about the migrants and the migrant crisis, feel free to skip ahead. But this is probably going to be a long video, and it's a great opportunity for me to talk about many things and demonstrate how the things that are going on in our world are related to natural law and how they're actually very simple. These topics that seem like they're super complex and complicated, they're actually very simple. And I'll talk about that. And I also get to talk about the occult web of control, and I'll explain what that means, and the psychology of government as a whole. And in simple language, you can actually just come to accurately know what's going on in the world and why. What's going on in Venezuela is actually pretty simple. Why Western countries are getting flooded with people from different nations, it's actually pretty simple. So I'm going to get right into that. Venezuela, what's the problem there? The crisis there, what is the crisis and why people are leaving? So just to paint a picture of what's going on, 94% of people in Venezuela live in poverty, right? So 94% are living in poverty. 75% of them have lost an average of 20 pounds. So 3/4 of them are, it's impoverishment up until the point where they're losing 20 pounds. Okay, that's a significant percentage of their weight. So that's, just to let you know. And they have a top 3 highest murder rate in the world right now. Since this has been happening, there's been more violence. So basically what it is a total ghetto. Venezuela is a total ghetto. It's a starvation experiment of 30 million people. It's a 30 million population of basically a ghetto, a concentration camp. Now, before I talk about the causal factors and why that happened there, a couple things you got to know about Venezuela, right, to introduce it. It has the highest proven oil reserves in the world. People don't know that. It's 18% of the world's oil is in Venezuela. So their economy has always been totally dependent on oil for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So that means that their entire economy is controlled by the international push-pull system of petrochemical games, of the hydrocarbon oil industry, right? The price completely controls their economy. The global price of oil controls their economy because of that. And the world is a web of control, okay, where members of the dark occult influence people from all over the web to pull certain strings. That's how it works. Think about it like a spider's web. And in the middle of the web, there's the big spider who controls the dark occultists who influence the people in power, like the presidents and the bureaucrats, to pull the strings. And that spider is not a person. People falsely believe that there's like a single entity that controls the whole world. It's an ideology and a religion, and it's called Satanism. Okay, and the inner circle of dark occultists actually does not refer to it as that. They sometimes will call it the old religion or the Order of the Black Sun, or maybe refer it to a couple different names, but they don't have a name. But the ideology, we call it Satanism. That's what it is. It's a Satanism. And the mission of Satanism and the dark occultists is to build on earth a permanent state of slavery. And that means the people, the animals, down to the water and air molecules, everything is locked down, enslaved. That's the goal. That's the dark great work. Just to take a step back and really get the concept of the web across. When I say the dark occultists who are getting the people to pull the strings, that means it's not that's why I use the web and not the pyramid, because we've seen the archetype of the pyramid. It's on the dollar bill, and we think the way the world is controlled is like a pyramid, like the way a corporation is. It's literally a top-down pyramid, where in the macrocosmic sense of like who's controlling the earth, it's more of a web. It's an interconnected web. This is the way it is in business. You know, if you have your company or if you're high up doing anything, you will notice that this is how things tend to work in the world. It's not a top-down easy system. It's a web of influence where people are horizontally influencing each other, but as you get closer to the center, when the strings are being pulled from there, it is influencing it like a pyramid, but it's a more complex version of it. It's like if you extended the pyramid 360 degrees, that is more how the web works. So I hope you guys are getting that picture. I'm gonna move on and talk about this more, and to understand the objective, the desire to do the dark great work, to build a system of slavery. I know that doesn't seem natural to many people, right? The people I talk to, it doesn't really click. Not everybody has accepted or believes that there are people who are that dark. So to understand that objective and that desire, you would have to understand the mindset of a sexual sadist, right? Where humanity and nature and the earth, they're like the woman who's the victim, right? And the mission of this person, this entity, is to rape and torture and ultimately cannibalize the woman. Cannibalism is like the ultimate goal of this. It's total possession and consumption. So people should study that mindset, and then it will become more clear, because this is what the ideology of Satanism is going to do long term. That is the actual goal. And this is the highest possible exercise of power, right, that is available to an individual who's totally psychopathic and mentally ill. And most often that's because it's a result of themselves being a victim of trauma, of extreme trauma, thus putting them in a state of self-hatred. That's usually how it goes. But as far as controlling the 30 million people of Venezuela on that web, it's very easy, actually, because the central bank controls the paper money, right? As it does here. You have the Federal Reserve. The central bank controls the paper money, and then there's actually a bank that controls all the different central banks. People don't really know this, but the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS in Switzerland, is like the central bank of all the different central banks. So it actually completely sets monetary policy for the whole globe. And that's been in effect since 1930, but this part of the web was in place long before 1930. That's why when people say New World Order, that's kind of a misnomer, because people say that they're building this system, that the system of control is really being built now. it's being strengthened now, but the system of control is ancient. Okay, so the Bank of International Settlements has been around since 1930, but it's been around long before that system of top-down financial control, and it'll be that way long after the Bank of International Settlements if something happens to it. Because the spider in the middle of the web is not a person or even an entity or an organization. It's an idea. It's an ideology. It's the ideology of Satanism. And by the way, real quick, what are the tenets of Satanism? What is that ideology I'm talking about? Number one, first and foremost, it's complete ego. It's a complete self-preservation. That is the first tenet of Satanism. And then the other huge one is moral relativism, which means that people can make up their own standards of right and wrong and therefore do whatever they want according to those standards. And then that ideology goes further into social Darwinism and eugenics, which basically is your precursor to genocide, okay? And since the spider in the middle of the web is not a person, it will always be there as long as the individuals on the web continue to hold that same mindset. That means you can't just kill the king. You can't just remove a certain institution. You can't just overthrow a certain government. The ideology will still be there. So you take the spider away, and then the spider is right there in the middle again, because the idea still exists in that inner circle of dark occultists who are influencing things in the world. This is called a distributed network, right? On the internet, this is what's called a distributed network. And on a distributed network, you cannot take down the original file. If, say, 10 people have it, this is why torrents don't get censored, because it's a distributed network. So if you take down the central server, you don't actually stop transmission of data, because all of the different clients on that network have access to the main file, which I'm talking about as the spider, which is Satanism. Okay, it's called a distributed network, and that's what runs the world. That's why the change has to occur in the mind. In the mind is the important thing. So that happens. I'm just monitoring my recording. It's going to be a long one. I want to make sure I don't have any technical problems. Okay, so in 1960, going back to the background of Venezuela, OPEC forms. Okay, OPEC is a coalition of oil exporting nations, right? The countries like Venezuela that have a lot of oil, that make their money off of selling their oil. And OPEC consists of Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So basically this is a cartel. It's even called that. It's a cartel, which is a group of people who manipulate the market to sell something. So it's a centralization of oil industries, okay? This is part of the web, okay, and how Venezuela fits in on that web. Now, in 1976, Venezuela nationalized their oil industry, which means they fused the corporation with government. They nationalized their oil, like socialistically, right? So they formed the Petroleum de Venezuela, the PDVSA, and I'm just going to refer to it as the Venezuela Oil Company, because it's the national oil company. It's controlled by the government. They did this 16 years after OPEC forms. And just to talk a little more about OPEC, the reason they joined together is basically to manipulate the market, to give those countries more power, right? Because they're selling all the oil. So now if they can meet together and they can talk about the price, collude on the price, that's going to make them more money, because they control most of the world's oil between those nations. So then Venezuela nationalizes their oil, of course, for the government to rake in those profits. And by the way, the current president of the Central Bank of Venezuela, the central bank that controls the money, is Calixto Ortega Sanchez. Okay? Calixto Sanchez. He used to be an advisor in the Venezuela Oil Company, the Petroleum de Venezuela, right? That company that they formed, the National Oil Company. And he also used to be the vice president of finance at Citgo. Yeah, Citgo, the oil company, the gas company in the United States. And Citgo is actually majority owned by the Venezuelan oil company, by Petroleum de Venezuela. So I'm pointing that out to point out the total corruption and conflict of interest there, right? And the person that's supposed to control the money of Venezuela, the president of the central bank that decides the interest rates, they decide how much money they're printing, they decide all kinds of money policy, right? Monetary policy. He's in the business with the oil company, and then he's the vice president of finance at an American company that's owned by that company. Is that not a conflict of interest? And in countries like Venezuela, the strings are very easy to pull, because this is just that type of cartel behavior. It's actual gang behavior. It's pretty simple. It's not as white collar even as it is here in the United States or in another country. It's really who you know. And that's why you get people like this that are just working. They're working in both these companies that clearly have a conflict of interest. It's who you know. And because the people in Venezuela never really had any real power, like real private property, and they never had a high collective knowledge of natural law principles the way we do in the United States. Relatively, because we don't have knowledge of these principles. But I'm talking about that American concept of having individual property, actually, having that free enterprise and the ability to easily start a company, things like that, okay? So they never had that. It's always been gang rule, and this is different Latin American countries too. And I know I'm not from there, but I speak about it. I know because this was the same way after the Soviet Union collapsed in Poland. It kind of was like this. It's like just gang rule. It's who you know. It's mob rule. It's all about corruption. It's family members getting into positions of power. It's not about what you can actually do, being actually competent at your job. It's just who you know. And this is this type of gang behavior, okay? And the people have always been ruled by fear in a country like Venezuela, so they never really got free from the colonial system and the imperialist way of life. Despite their so-called independence, all these nations get their independence. Haiti had their independence, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, everybody's independent now, but they've never really gotten free from the colonial system. And I'm going to use the United States as an example again. To a large extent, this country totally got free from that colonial system. To a degree, of course, like I say, relatively. But basically, the whole way of life was changed. Like, if the oil industry controls, just because the flag change and the government change, and they say you're independent, nothing really changed. Okay, who actually holds the power still holds the power. So I wanted to point that out, the conflict of interest there, how that web works, how easy it is to pull in Venezuela. Now I'm going to go into the causal factors of what caused that crisis in Venezuela. So you could start it here. It is the best place to start. February 2nd, the day of my birth, 3 years exactly after I was born, Hugo Chavez becomes president in Venezuela. So basically, Hugo Chavez was a socialist. So when he took power, he started giving away food to the poor, free health care, free housing, totally giving away to the poor. This actually, just to people, very supporting the people, and this actually raised the standard of living a lot at first, okay? This helped them at first. But over time, as the oil profits became unstable, their revenue decreased of the government. Because remember, they nationalized the oil industry. So when the oil price is high and they're selling a whole bunch of oil to different nations, they're going to be making money, and you can give away free food to everybody and they'll be fine because they're producing a lot. But now the oil prices fell, and now all of a sudden they don't have money, right? Okay, the revenue decreased, so now there's no more money for those populist programs and their social policies. But now Chavez can't stop those programs. He couldn't stop them because that's the only reason people support him. Now, he can't take that off the table because the people are gonna be up in arms and say, what's going on? Why are things falling apart? Okay, so all of his public support is based on that. So what did he do? He has to go into the hard socialism stage. This always happens in socialist nations. There's like a soft period, there's like a period of good times, and then it always goes into the hard socialism stage. So a few years later now, you got the winter of 2002, 2003, and there was a national strike, okay, including that the main national petroleum company, after people rebelled against his rulership and actually tried to overthrow the government. So what they did is, what Hugo Chavez did is they actually imposed currency controls at this time, setting the dollar at a fixed rate of exchange. Okay, so they set how much Venezuelan bolivar, but the bolivar, the currency of Venezuela, how much of that you had to spend to get a dollar, okay, the currency rate. So, and this is because people began using the dollar. Why? Because, I'll talk about it actually at the end, but people began using the dollar because that's what was valuable, okay? The bolivar was no longer valuable because, you see, when you have socialism and you're taking over production and things are falling apart, you get shortages, you get all of this, the currency drops. Okay, it's simple stuff. So they actually imposed these currency controls, which allowed them to exchange who gets dollars, which means they totally control the economy. Okay, the government totally was able to control all of the money. And they suspended the bolivar and set maximum prices for everything, which basically makes it impossible for you to live without Chavez's permission. That's what they did. So setting that fixed rate and making it illegal to trade in the country's currency basically allowed them to control all of the currency, because they set that exchange rate for the dollar and they made it so that you could only use the dollar. So that's like totally putting a gate. They're the gatekeepers of money at all, like totally. And now, several years after that, June 2nd, 2010, Hugo Chavez declared an economic war due to increasing shortages. This is 13 years ago to the day. So it's only right that I talk about it and talk about it extensively. To anybody who makes it through this video, it's really, this is knowledge that we should all have that we don't have, and it's actually not that hard. It took me a day of reading, and by a day, I mean like an hour and a half after work. Okay, I don't do this full time, obviously. So Hugo Chavez declares an economic war. I'm gonna read from an article from that day, the day it happened. While the political environment is heated as the September legislative election looms, which Chavez considers crucial for the implementation of socialism in the oil country, the president intensified his attacks against the largest food processor in the nation, Empresas Polar. So he got into a beef with the largest food processor. Now, is that smart to get into like an economic war with the food company? And now, what did I say in the beginning? 94% in poverty, people don't have food. These are the causal factors of that. Okay, so the attacks against that food processor. Why? The government has nationalized millions of hectares of land, millions of acres of land, industries, from oil companies to slaughterhouses, and shops such as refrigerators and markets. Only socialism will solve the problems of the poor, he says. This is from the article. He says only socialism will solve the problems of the poor. So the government nationalized all of this stuff. Now, nationalize is a euphemism. What it actually means is they stole people's land. They took away, they invaded people's companies and factories and slaughterhouses and everything. They took it over. The government took it over even more so, okay? Actually went in and took your land, took your house, took your factory, took all your equipment, and says this is ours now. That's socialism, okay? And back to the article. Polar is the company, Empresas Polar It's polar. A polar union leader rejected possible nationalization over the weekend, which he said would worsen working conditions. Chavez said that the unionist position is sad, that workers in capitalist companies are like slaves, and that only his government guarantees job stability. So, back to what he said, we are like slaves. Workers in capitalist companies are like slaves. He's correct about that, right? But I will just show now how this is just a cartel beef between slave masters. Yeah, the people that work for that food processing company in Venezuela, I'm sure they will work like slaves. Yeah, but obviously government is slavery, and Hugo Chavez it treats people like slaves as well. I'm going to show this. Back to the article. Faced with the intermittent shortage of basic foods such as oil, flour, this is a Spanish translation, oil is not a food, but such as oil, flour, and sugar, including some items produced by Polar, Chavez accuses businessmen of hoarding products to shoot prices. So he's basically accusing the private company of manipulating the price, and he's using that as the reason of why he has to come in and take it over and socialize it. Now, do corporations collude and lie to manipulate prices? Hell yeah. And that's what OPEC is. That coalition of oil producing nations, that's what it is. It's just market manipulation to drive up the price. So back to the article. Chavez directly challenged the president of Polar, Lorenzo Mendoza. And this is a quote from Hugo Chavez now, so you can get a feeling for what type of guy this is. He said, "Mendoza, I accept the challenge, you know. Let's see who can last longer, Mendoza. Let's fight then. You with your millions and me with my morality." And that's like a public speech, just to let you know what kind of a mafia guy, what type of criminal, mafia member he is. But yeah, he's saying, me with my morality. He's referring to the ideology of communism, of socialism, and how that is supposed to take away from the people who are actually making money and give it to the poor people, and then that's some sort of morality. It's actually the opposite of morality. Morality is actually objective. It has nothing to do with socialism. It's just do no harm. That's morality. That's all it is. And of course, Hugo Chavez did the exact opposite of that. Now, he called him out. He said, let's see who can last longer. I'll just mention that 3 years after this, Hugo Chavez died of cancer. So Mendoza actually did last longer. So he got the last laugh there. And Mendoza is a member of World Economic Forum. He's to this day CEO of that company. And he's a member of WEF. He owns the biggest private company in Venezuela. And the world praises him for his resilience in tough times. He's in the World Economic Forum. He's over there talking with Klaus Schwab. The guy himself profits from what's going on in Venezuela right now. So he's not a good guy at all. That's not what I'm saying, right? These are both immoral people in the way they act. But Hugo Chavez much more so, because the government, I put them at a much higher level of immorality than even like corrupt businessmen and even street criminals, because they're doing the crime, they're doing actual crime every day, doing theft and coercion, and people think they have the right to do it, and they pretend that they have the right to do it. So they're at even a higher level of immorality to me. But just want to point that out. Mendoza's not a good guy, okay? These are just beefs between cartel bosses. So then Hugo Chavez dies. Nicolas Maduro becomes the president. Now Maduro is actually used to be Hugo Chavez's vice president. He's actually chosen as a successor. So yeah, Chavez died, but Chavez is still there. His name is Nicolas Maduro. Like I said, it's the ideology that matters. Okay? He continued the socialist policies and countered more shortages and inflation with more price controls. Of course, that's what socialists do. As the problem gets worse, they will not change how they act. They will just do more. Okay? So, and he actually put the military in charge of food. Now, can you imagine putting the military in charge of food? It's like the biggest oxymoron ever, you know? Putting the wolf in charge of the sheep. But it's even crazier than that, just because of how left-brain the military is, and how much, they just understand domination and doing, simple actions like this. The complete opposite of food, the complete opposite of nourishment. But not to get too far into that. He put the military in charge of food. So now they actually import most of their food. Almost all of their food, they import it, which means they buy it from outside the country. Because they can't grow it. Because the military is in charge of the food. And they don't know how to grow food. So they say, fuck it, we'll just buy it. And they buy it from different nations. And then the military, because the military is, of course, corrupt over there. I mean, the military in a nation is only going to be a reflection of the consciousness of that nation. So, but I'm just saying that in a nation, the military are always going to be less intelligent because they're followers. So they're going to be cowards, order followers, and psychopaths. Those are the type of people that join the military, right? Mainly. Some people join it just out of ego, but trying to get social respect and try to get it easy, free ride to college, But people who actually want to be in the military, they're from those three groups: order followers, cowards, and psychopaths. So because they're those type of people, they're charging money. They're charging more money to sell the food to the people that need it. So they're just totally gouging the price. After buying the food from other nations, they take their cut before they give it to the people that are starving. Okay, that's socialism for you. That's corruption. That's the military in charge of food. Now, they do this because they can't grow food themselves. Well, why can't they grow food? Right? Why? This is the biggest thing about the Venezuela crisis that I want to explain. That I tell people, it's like, okay, there's a food, or you hear this in Africa and different nations. Like, okay, they have a famine. They have a famine. People don't have food. They're starving. Why? Because the earth provides all of the food you need. You don't think there's fertile land in Venezuela? Famine is a condition created by rulership. Always 100% of the time, other than exceptions of like a small sample size, something happens where you actually have a breakdown of natural resources, something like that. But hunger happens because of government. So why can't they grow food? Because before they could grow food, so everybody had food for thousands of years that people have been living in Venezuela. The Incas over there, they did fine. Everybody always had food. Now they have no food. Why? What happened? Was it because there was a nuclear bomb exploded, or like they sprayed it with toxic chemicals? No, that's not what happened. Why can't they grow the food? Because government nationalized the farms and processing plants. So the government is in charge of producing food now, right? And the government is totally incompetent when it comes to doing things like that. They totally don't know how to do anything. Government only knows how to take what you do. They're pretty good at taking taxes, okay? And that's even a better system, because at least the people are doing what they know how to do, and they just have to give them a cut. And at least we don't have hunger in the streets in the United States. Excuse me. So, and they actually implemented these type of price controls that would force the farmers to sell at a loss. So the government, not only do they control the production of food, if the farmer actually wanted to sell their food like they always did, like they're supposed to, they would actually lose money, because they made the price, the government mandated price, so high that, or so low that they would sell at a loss. They wouldn't make any money doing it. So what's the cause of hunger and shortages? It's government. So understand that the web was pulled to put Venezuela in this condition. This didn't just happen. This didn't happen as an act of nature or an act of God. This was done intentionally by specific actions. And when the oil prices dropped, as they did, Venezuela is totally at the mercy of foreign interests. That's what happens. So now what happens is the government is forced to buy food and medicine from other countries, right? And so they actually dipped into the Petroleum de Venezuela company, into the national oil company, to pay for that. And that's classic socialism. They're running out of money, their system's not working. They'll just reach in and take more money from wherever they can find it. That's socialism. And so what happened now is the only industry in the country that actually works, that actually makes money is working less and less efficiently because they're taking the money out. So they can't do maintenance, they can't reinvest, they can't expand. And the only reason nothing works is because the same people who are taking the money are not allowing it to work. It's like the system is being broken intentionally. And under this under this justification of socialism, people just go with it. And this hasn't been globally exposed to people yet. Like, there are people here in the United States that think socialism could work somehow, little by little. And little by little you get to Venezuela. Always this is how it works. I need to get a drink. It's gonna be a long video. I need a drink. I've been working with fiberglass and stuff like that, so it's catching up to me. So then, Maduro, after he's starting to dip into the oil profits, he actually declares an economic emergency and grabs even more power. Okay? So, economic emergency basically declares what is akin to martial law, where he can get even more power, saying that that's because things are getting worse and worse in the country and he has to kind of regain control. But this, of course, making things worse because he's the one who created the problem in the first place. Now, in 2018, they had an election where Maduro won 68% of the votes. So the whole nation's falling apart, but he wins the election by 70%. Of course, this result was challenged by countries including Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, Canada, Germany, France, and the United States. All those countries, they deemed it fraudulent, and they moved to recognize Juan Guaido as president. Okay, Guaido was the other guy. He got 32% allegedly, and they recognize him as the actual president. But other nations, such as Cuba, China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, continued to recognize Maduro as president. Does that sound familiar? Cuba, China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Now that's like the international communist, the Red Coalition forming, right? There's more of this. It's kind of coming up. Those countries stick together. Cuba, China, Russia. That's kind of that half of the world, right? And it's not about who actually won the election that's important. It's just about where everybody happens to fit on the web. It's not that they actually believe that guy won or this guy won. It's just about what works for the interests. Which way are they pulling on the web? I hope people don't think that any amount of truth is coming from these people, or that accuracy is something they care about. It's just little mafia street moves. I've talked about this over and over again. And man, how about this stuff with the I'll talk about the elections more. But in 2019, Trump signed a total economic embargo against Venezuela, right? It means you totally no one is allowed to trade Venezuela. Trump did that in 2019. Of course, making things worse because they have to they can't trade with the United States. If you can't trade with the United States, you're done as an economy, right? This is 2019. This is happening right now. So he did a total economic embargo, total sanctions against Venezuela. So then, of course, 2020, election happens. 2021, Biden takes office. So what do you think he did? Of course, what did he do? He probably reversed this, right? He reversed all the other things that Trump did, right? Of course, he probably thinking that this is a terrible move. So, of course, he took that back and there are no more sanctions. No, that's not what he did. That's not what Joe Biden did. Joe Biden totally kept it in place. The economic embargo of Venezuela is totally in place to this day, and they claim to do this to force Maduro out of power, but that's not how this works. That's not how it works. That only allows the tyrant to maintain his stranglehold, because he controls the ability to survive even more, right? Keeping the people in like a total survival, fear, and panic state. You think those sanctions against Russia are getting Putin out of office, out of power? Are you kidding me? No. They give him a reason to stay in power and have even more of an iron grip on the people. Obviously, because you got a total sanctions, the economy is totally dead, totally isolate the nation. And who's going to overthrow him without external influence if there's no trade and exchange in and out of the country? And the reason is that they say that it's all because they don't support the Maduro regimes, and they want to get him out. And they think that these sanctions are going to get him out. How? That's not how this works. These kind of issues show that politics is a complete joke. The whole thing is a joke. Because you see the guy in, and Biden said he's basically trying to reverse everything that Trump did. Things like this, they don't get touched. Venezuela is being starved by an international global decree. Okay, it's implied, but it's a decree nonetheless. I know that's an oxymoron, because a decree means saying something, and to imply something means it's not said. But it's like an implied order that Venezuela is supposed to get starved right now. That's why the sanctions went up. They want them to get starved. Okay? This is the international socialism that's coming, and this is the implementation of Satanism and the building of the dark great work. So, do you notice, by the way, how there's disputed elections all over the world these days? These claims of fraudulent elections are not just in the United States. All these disputed elections and coups d'etats, right? Attempts to overthrow the state. People willing to battle for their leader, willing to rush the capital for their leader to get into power, for their regime. You see, this is happening more now. Now, people from the Soviet era, they know all about this. This is how it used to be in Poland, where I come from, in those Eastern European nations. But it was basically a thing of the past, and now it's coming back. And so is nationalism. So is this Cold War era thinking, we got to do this before Russia does it. So is the East versus West type of thing, right? The expansion of socialist world powers, right? Russia, China, Russia against Ukraine, China against Taiwan, this kind of expansion of these old Soviet superpowers. And the tribalism is coming back, the racialism, people aligning with their race more and more. This kind of ethnic allegiance and loyalty. This is all coming back now, and fighting over election winners is just one of the parts of this. It's a part of this. And I'll mention this again. I have to say, this is episode 26. Episode 1, I openly speak about armed rebellion against tyrannical government on this channel. I talk about every controversial topic on this channel that you can think of. And the only time I've ever been censored is when I talked about the validity of the 2020 United States presidential election. That was episode 1. I was censored for that. That episode is in the playlist, but you see it's hidden. It will never be shown on YouTube. You have to go to truthandlaw.com to see that one. It's on different platforms that haven't censored me. So, that deep dive into Venezuela, that's just a glimpse into the whole global web, right? Maduro, Chavez, they're just like lackeys, okay? Just like Stalin, like Fidel Castro, these are pawns. They're like local bullies that are supposed to just like drag their corner of the cell block along where the people pulling the strings of the occult web of control decide that it's time to go. And you get a guy like Hugo Chavez, basically like, okay, you can have the whole nation, we'll help you get in, but you have to just pull him along. So there he is, declaring economic war on food companies, calling them out like it's a soap opera. He's on national television doing all this egotistical, peacocking, just like total ego play, and that's what these people are charged with doing. They get the mission, they're charged with doing that. They get their part of the world, they get Venezuela, they get their own little country, and these little dictators are supposed to just drag those people along, because in the Satanist web, that is the path that was chosen for that particular nation. Here in the United States, it's different. It's always been different from the start, because we have weapons, because we had the American Revolution, and because this has become such a place of free exchange in history. So here, no Hugo Chavez could have ever came up here. It would have been pretty short. It would have been pretty quick. The people would not have gotten along. So the Satanist web, they've just decided, because these people are smart. These people on the inside of the web, near the center, they're very close, and they're very smart. They have all the information, and they choose things in an intelligent way. So the way we're going to get to that is through the long march through the institutions, a very slow socialism mixed with corporatism, based on belief in money, based on the destruction of the family unit, based on high-tech stuff, a flooding of information, a way to censor things by actually flooding with information. This is the way we're supposed to get there, okay? And the migrants are pawns too, and most people claim to be aware, of like worldly matters. They claim to know this. They're like, yeah, we know the migrants. It's not their fault. We know the migrants are just being used against us. But all these people that claim to know, they still believe in the religion of government, okay? And the religion that government is something that's legitimate and that can even be sustained in an orderly way. And that's how it goes with religionists. You'll talk to them and you explain natural law to them, and they understand. And they understand in the abstract, in theory. But in the real world, in practice, when it comes down to actual daily life, their religious programming takes over, and then they can't put two and two together. And people can't seem to transcend this like nagging and complaining about the migrants and the immigrants and these people are destroying our culture. I hear this all the time. They say that these migrants are getting free iPhones, that they give them $1,000 cash, and then they take their name, they give them a social security number, and they automatically cast a ballot for Democrat. This is the kind of stuff I hear. As if that even matters, you know? Put yourself mentally in a position where you completely leave your whole life behind and go to another continent where you don't know anybody, you don't know the language, you don't know how to set up, no familiarity, right? Think about it. You think people are leaving Venezuela and Ukraine for handouts? Like, I'm not talking about do they get handouts or not. Are they leaving their country for handouts? For an easy ride? No, an easy ride for people is staying where they are and doing what the people around you have always done. And this is what most people do. Most people pick the easy ride anyway. But yeah, does government give away things that they shouldn't be giving away? Yeah, they do. They might even give away luxury items, maybe. They might give them iPhones. But let's not be naive, folks, you know? These people came from Venezuela, a total ghetto, a total socialist hell. And they should be a reminder to us, like a wake-up call of what government does to a society. So, except when it happens here, there won't be anywhere to migrate. There won't be anywhere for us to go. So, people gotta wake up instead of just complaining, little complaints about what these people are doing. The problem is government, our government, okay? Their government is what it is. But we can't go over there and change our government, but we can change this. We can change this system of control that's got the boot on our neck here, because that's who's bringing them anyway, right? But like I said, there won't be anywhere to go if we fall here. America will be the last place to fall, and then the whole world really will be hell, much worse than Venezuela, because it won't be like the old mafia cartel rule system. Here it'll be like a high-tech hybrid of North Korea, David Parker Ray's trailer, and Unit 731 look those last two up. That's what's going to happen here. It's going to be like a mix of those things. It's going to be a real hell playground for sadists. And this has been a 20-year, at least 20 years, like 25-year at least, international process to create this Venezuela problem, this migrant crisis. Do you really think that if DeSantis or Trump wins, that will change? 25 years in the making. International string pulling for years, okay? For years. Influence programming for years, okay? These people know what they're doing. I'm talking about the people socially engineering things like this. And people think that if their guy gets in, a president of a nation that, a president of the United States, they can't do shit when it comes to international oil prices. They're little when it comes to that. Their money is little. Even the people funding them. Because it's not just the United States, Like those princes that have like 1,000-year generational wealth in Saudi Arabia. Those billionaires in China that we don't even know. But somebody's making money from all that slave labor. Look at everything most of the equipment I use is China. Everything, look around you, is made in China. Somebody's making the money off of that. You really think these people don't have huge influence? You think your little presidential candidate is going to do anything? You're a religionist if you believe this, right? And people want to blame the migrants. If you were in the position of the migrants, you would shit your pants, straight up. This is the main idea. You would crawl to whichever boat they told you to crawl to. You wouldn't even ask where it's going. You wouldn't ask where you're going. As soon as you get dropped off, you would go wherever they point you to go. Most people would do this. That's why I have a problem with the complaining, because it's not some type of... It's not a grievance or disagreement based on principle. It's just because they think that's unfair to them, and I want things to be good for me, but that's not good for me. Where's the principle here? You would go wherever they told you to go. And I'm talking to believers in government. Like I'm not talking about anarchists. I'm not talking about people who watch my stuff who practice self-governance. So the people I'm talking to may not even be watching this video, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because if shit hits the fan in 5 to 10 years, this video will still be around. It might blow up around them, because that's why I make these videos now, and I touch all these topics now, because you never know when this is going to become like urgent knowledge and highly sought after knowledge. Because as you see, people are not talking about the topics I'm talking about, not like this. Most people who have a high knowledge of morality and natural law don't touch current events so much, because a lot of current events, there's a lot of lies going on, and they change a lot, right? So talking about the principles, there's really no need to talk about current events, because once you have the principles, it doesn't matter what's going on, you're going to be fine. But I talk about the current events to show, based on the principles, what's going on. This is like taking it into the street and applying those principles, okay? Taking those tools, putting the hammer to the nail and checking them and showing how natural law does work, okay? Oh, and by the way, people who are like afraid of losing their jobs, saying they're going to take your jobs, the immigrants are going to take your jobs, the migrants. If you're afraid of losing your job to a migrant worker, then that means you're not in right livelihood. Because I work construction, so my job, I'm not afraid of losing my job to anyone. These people that are coming from different countries, they can't take my job. Sometimes I wish somebody could take my job and do what I do for a day, just to make my life easier. It won't happen. That's why I'm not afraid of losing my job to AI, because it just doesn't work. You need to be able to deal with people. You need to make like risky decisions on the fly. So and I know people that do things that actually, people are super talented, people do super amazing things. They're not afraid of losing their job, because it's not a slave job. If an unqualified worker can take your job, then you're working a slave job. Okay, so I'm not saying that's your fault. Like, the system is messed up. I don't want to be too hard on people. You might be working a job that somebody else could do because that's the best you can get. So this corporate system is messed up. Not just socialism. The so-called capitalism here is messed up as well. It's not even capitalism, it's corporatism, but we can call it capitalism. I'm not like a capitalist. I'm a natural law, free market, complete free market anarchist. And it's not even about the market, it's about complete free exchange of information and total individual property. Okay? That's the system. But if you're worried about losing your job, then maybe you need to change your job, because it is a slave job, like Chavez said. But at the end of the day, the migrant influx is a weapon against the people. Okay, I understand. I agree with the agenda. I agree with the people who have put that forward, that agenda exists and is working out that way. I know this is going to, a reduction of the purchasing power, especially of the middle class, injection of anxiety, and influx of people who are potentially dangerous, since they share no philosophical or cultural allegiances with the people here. I get that. Those things are correct. But understand this. The migrant problem is only a problem as long as they're dependent on government. The only reason it costs even a dime to feed and shelter them is because the government won't let them work. They won't let them make money. Just like back in Venezuela. They have to wait months to get their work authorization now. When you apply for asylum, they make you fill out the paperwork. And they actually can't work. And what they have to wait months for work authorization? That's a bullshit concept to begin with. What is work authorization? This is crazy. People don't think about this. Who can authorize anybody to make money? They're not your fucking slave. So it's not up to you. Nobody can say you're not allowed to make money. And the whole concept of this is based on the belief that a ruler or master can give you the right to exist, just to make money, just to exist, right? And that's slavery. That's the concept of slavery, and everybody believes in it. So everybody pays their taxes, everybody waits for their work authorization when they need to. People aren't so quick to pay cash and totally skirt documentation. Some people do it, I heard. Now, the city of Chicago wants to use taxpayer money to house, clothe, and feed them, right? This caused like a big uproar. People are, I haven't seen them, but I've heard people were at the town hall meetings by the college protesting. They're up in arms. They're saying it's injustice that they're taking taxpayer money to house, clothe, and feed them. And that's true, that's a mismanagement of funds, but all you need to do is let them work. So you wouldn't need to shelter them and basically have them not work for 6 months. If I didn't work for 2 months, I would get kicked out of I can't make rent, right? So I'm totally on board with not being wasteful with resources, right? This is beside the fact that taxpayer money is not even rightfully acquired money. It's stolen money, because taxation is theft and slavery. But I'm just saying, if they let them work, they pay for themselves. They'll be fine. These people can easily make a living here if you let them. If the government just would get out of the way, there would be no migrant problem. First of all, because nobody would be strategically flying them in. But beside the point. And I've heard the stories from France and Sweden, about rape being about rape being rampant near the migrant camps committed by these migrants, okay? People will say that if the government just let them get out into the city freely, that there would be a lot of rape of women and young girls. And to that I say, if government just got out of the way of everybody, including us, and let us buy and sell firearms freely, rape goes down to 0. There's no more rape in the world if that happens. Virtually zero, other than in the households, of course, but which is a whole different problem. It's not a different problem, but that's a separate issue. Like, rape in the streets will go down to zero if we could just have guns as accessible as other things. But of course that won't happen. Just like in Venezuela, everything would be fine if the government just would get out of the way. Let the farmers grow food. Let the painters paint. Let people do what they do. Let the drug dealers be drug dealers. Everybody's going to find their place in society. And if people actually become a problem, like if a problem grows so much and gets out of control, the people will solve the problem between each other, among each other, okay? That will happen. But I do have to say, are there exceptions to the government being totally incompetent and destructive, especially in economic sense? Yes. And there are some instances where the government does something good, and I actually saw an example of this morning. That's why I have to mention it, because just, as an exercise in truth and journalistic integrity. I saw a crossing guard that had a limp. Like, you could see, I was driving to work this morning, and he's limping like pretty severely, but he's got the stop sign, so he's a crossing guard. He was just getting off of the street. I'm saying, like, he's definitely disabled, but he's limping. He can walk, but he's got a really hard limp, right? So I don't know if it's a birth defect, I don't know if it's a chronic illness or an injury he sustained throughout life, right? But anyway, this guy's walking, and I know this is like a government hire, that he was hired, by whatever company. He's a crossing guard for the school or the park district, that of course is tied into the schools, the public schools. So he's a government hire, and if we lived in a world without government, but still had the corporate system, still had businesses just being motivated only by profit, that guy probably wouldn't have gotten hired. There probably would be somebody willing to do that work who didn't have like a debilitating injury. So that guy was totally qualified. Excuse me. He was totally fine for the job, totally qualified for it. But if it wasn't for government, that government hire, he probably wouldn't have a work. He probably wouldn't be able to have that job, which without it, he might be in trouble. He might be homeless otherwise, right? So that is a very rare example of government putting somebody capable of fulfilling the job in the right place, actual intelligent way. Very rare example of, and by the way, that was a local government doing that, right? That wasn't like federal, okay? But this was actually probably not the city of Chicago. This might have been like Oak Park. But ultimately, it's not worth it, okay? It's not worth it for that example. For one example of that guy, that crossing guard who actually got an empathetic and intelligent thing was done to allow him to have a job like that. Whereas in a cutthroat corporate environment, he wouldn't have. You have one example of that. I've seen that once. And you have 100 nations throughout history and more and counting descending into collapse and tyranny. And that's what government does. And people make the mistake of thinking it's just socialism, just Chavez, and we wouldn't get Castro here, and we wouldn't get Stalin here. No, we will get that here. You'll see. It will just happen slowly. For the people that skipped to this part, missing the bulk of the video, I explained in the video about the occult web of power and what the big picture is. And the reason people don't have the big picture is because they don't have this time to stop and think and research, think about the world. That's the exact reason. So if you can't sit through an hour-long video in one take, your strings are going to be pulled very easily in the coming future. Now, I have an epilogue. There's one more thing I'm going to talk about at the end, and it's about the economy in general, the concept of money in general. We have now a hardship in the United States, everywhere, inflation. They're talking about recession all over the world. So I'm going to talk about what makes hardship happen, why economic prosperity happens, how do people get rich, how do countries get rich, what is the economy. The economy is just an assessment of the flow of energy in a society. That's a good definition. The assessment of the flow of energy in a society. That's why a dollar, the bolivar, it's called a currency. Current not only means right now, a current is the flow of something, like a rip current, like a water current or an air current. It's just about how easily or frequently or freely people can exchange and transfer resources. That's currency. That's how valuable a currency is. So for example, the Venezuela currency, the bolivar, it dropped and people moved to the dollar. Why? Because the people in Venezuela were not producing, right? The things were collapsing. So their activity level, like even physical activity level of exchanging resources, was low, right? Fear-dominated economies lose money because the people are afraid their activity level becomes low. They don't want to get into business because they're afraid they might lose. So that's why that currency would drop compared to the dollar, because in the dollar people have always had a high level of activity and high confidence in the dollar. It's just confidence. So how does a currency lose value? That's how. Limiting the motion and reducing confidence in the ability to exchange. And that's actually how the stock market works. Stocks are actually just mostly bullshit made up ideas. Stocks are mostly arbitrary ideas with no value behind them at all. It's actually a game. The whole stock thing is a game. And the more confidence that people have on that idea, a stock, the more money it costs. So that's what actually makes the price go up. More people are buying and selling it. And when people are confident in it, they'll pay more and more for it. When people lose confidence, the price will plummet, and money is the same way. Money in general is the same way. It's just a measure of confidence and free exchange, okay? And there are all these economists and experts, and then you have the scammers and also the entrepreneurs, and they're all talking about money. They're talking about, push-pull economic cycles. They're talking about macroeconomics, interest rates. They're talking about different type of monetary policy, when money in the economy is like one of the most simple concepts ever. And the main idea is this: wealth is directly proportional to freedom. Being wealthy, being rich, is actually totally tied with freedom. And I know it seems counterintuitive at first. It doesn't really make sense at first, but that's what it actually is. The more free you are, the more money you're going to make. That's what it comes down to. If people are free to do what they want, people make money, because they're going to provide all the things that we need, because the earth already provides all the things we need. The sun provides all the energy we need. Okay, we have an unlimited source of money because we have an unlimited source of energy. The only thing we need is the current. We need the currency to flow. We need a high level of activity. We need to just take down like the big piles of rocks and dams that we built on the current. We get an infinite current. Okay, this is all Garden of Eden, this place, but we've turned it into a prison. Okay, through our ideas. There's a spider in the web over the earth. Okay, the spider needs to be removed. That idea needs to be cleansed. Then the web falls apart. Then you have your Garden of Eden. That's how that would work. The change has to happen in the mind. But since the earth provides all we need, they would make high quality items. They would create advances in technology, because the confidence would encourage them to be creative and follow your dream and actually investigate things you want to investigate. Try to make things better. That's confidence. That's basically a system that encourages life and evolution. Okay. Now, I'm not talking about capitalism. Okay. I'm beyond capitalism and socialism. I'm beyond political parties or anything like that. This is natural law, and economically, this is natural. This is a natural economy. It is just a total system of economic freedom that's going to encourage evolution and approaching perfection. That's going to encourage flow of resources. That's going to increase confidence. I'm talking about no regulations at all. Everything is legal. Everybody can trade. Why is that such a hard system to understand? It's the most natural thing ever. We all have this within us. If we would just take down our bullshit religious ideas that we hold, that we clog our currents with. That's why people are dying of heart disease and everybody's arteries are clogged. Physically, we're manifesting this. We're putting junk into our body physically. You know, we actually wore masks. We actually clogged the current for ourselves. But you know, sometimes you gotta wear a mask. If I would have worn a mask working with fiberglass, maybe I wouldn't have been coughing and drinking all this episode, you know. But beside the point, freedom creates wealth. Okay? Control, on the other hand, leads to economic death because it's based in fear, and fear ruins confidence. We have economic hardship and supply breakdowns not because of the stimulus checks we gave away, or the debt limit or anything like that. We have it because of government-inspired fear. Fear and control by the central banks and financial institutions, and then, those interest rates and everything. But even if they change their monetary policy, it doesn't actually affect us until our confidence goes down and the fear goes up. That's all it is. This is a mental game. And that's it. So, that was probably the longest video of This Week in Tyranny. Looks like I'm still recording, which I'm very happy about. There really wasn't a lot of gold in this episode. I wanted to take my time with it. If you have the time to go through this, I think a lot of people will benefit. People who didn't have the time. They tell us that these are complex issues, that we can't really know what's going on in Venezuela or what's going to happen with the economy. They want us to think all these things are so difficult, that we're not smart enough. This is what makes us poor, not in a money sense, but in a knowledge sense. We have total poverty. We have total mental poverty. But we can actually be mentally wealthy and rich and spiritually. And what is that? What does that come from? Confidence. Confidence, okay? Willing to exchange freely, okay? Not having these control systems set up. People have price controls, and the military controls the food in their mind. That's actually a profound and very applicable comparison. That's exactly what it is. We have these very rigid, outdated systems set up in our mind of how we learn, how we think about people. If we would destroy those, break those down, let the current flow, we will become wealthy. And that's why wealthy is just one letter away from healthy. A natural law will lead to health and wealth. So I talk about sending all kinds of love your way, and the message is, be confident. Don't let these people drive you into this socialist hellhole like Venezuela. It's not gonna happen here. So that'll be the end of this episode, and I'll see you next week on This Week in Tyranny.
I'm fed up with that bullshit. I'm fed up with